The mother tongue. The making of English is the story of three invasions and a cultural revolution. In the simplest terms, the language was brought to Britain by Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Influenced by Latin and Greek, when St. Augustine and his followers converted England to Christianity, subtly entrenched by the Danes, and finally transformed by the French-speaking Normans. From the beginning, English was a crafty hybrid, made in war and peace. It was, in the words of Daniel Defoe, your Roman, Saxon, Danish, Norman English. In the course of 1,000 years, a series of violent and dramatic events created a new language, which, by the time of Geoffrey Chaucer, is intelligible to modern eyes and ears without the aid of subtitles. The English have always accepted the mixed blood of their language. There was a vague understanding that they were part of a European language family, but it was not until the 18th century that a careful investigation of a gifted amateur linguist began to decipher the true extent of this common heritage. The common source. In the early days of the Raj, Sir William Jones, a British judge stationed in India, presented a remarkable address to the Ascetic Society in Calcutta. Fruits of his investigation into ancient Sanskrit, a keen lawyer, Jones had originally intended to familiarize himself with India's native law codes. To his surprise, he discovered that Sanskrit bore a striking resemblance to two other ancient languages of his acquaintances, Latin and Greek. The Sanskrit word for father, translated from its exotic alphabet, emerged as Pitar. Astonishingly similar, he observed, to the Greek and Latin pater. The Sanskrit for mother was mater. In the Latin of his school days, it was mater. Investigating further, he discovered dozens of similar correspondences. Though he was not the first to notice these similarities, no one before Sir William Jones had studied them systematically. The Sanskrit language, he announced to the Asiatic Society on the evening of 2nd February 1786, shared with Greek and Latin a stronger affinity than could possibly have been produced by accident, so strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. 2 centuries of linguistic research have only strengthened Jones' basic proposition. We now know that the language of about 1/3 of the human race comes from the Indo-European common source. These include the European descendants of Latin, French, Spanish, a great Slavic language, Russian, the Celtic languages, Irish and Gaelic, and the offshoot of German, Dutch, and English. A second important breakthrough in the search for the truth about the common source came from the folklorist Jacob Grimm, better known with his brother Wilhelm as the collector of fairy tales. Grimm's law established beyond question that the German Vater, and an English father, has the same root as the Sanskrit Latin pitar, pater. Words such as me, new, seven, and mother were also found to share this common ancestry. Now, the Indo-European basis for the common source was clear. It is sometimes said that you can deduce the history of a people from the words they use. Clever detective work among some 50 prehistoric vocabularies has now led to a reconstruction of the lifestyle of a vanished people, the first Indo-European tribes, the distant forebears of contemporary Europe. From the words they use, words for winter and horse, it seems likely that the Indo-Europeans lived a half-settled, half-nomadic existence. They had domestic animals, oxen, pigs, and sheep. They worked leather and wove wool, plowed the land, and planted grain. They had an established social and family structure, and they worshiped gods who are the clear ancestors of Indian, Mediterranean, and Celtic deities. Who these people were and when exactly they lived is a hotly disputed mystery. According to the Garden of Eden myth, they lived in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. But this theory was exploded by 19th century archaeology. Today, there are some who argue for the Krugen culture of the Russian steppes, other for the farming of the Danube Valley. The dates vary from 6000 BC to 4500 BC. The most widely accepted theory locates the environment of the Indo-Europeans in a cold northern climate in which common words for snow, beach, bee, and wolf played an important role. Furthermore, none of these prehistoric languages had a word for sea. From this and from our knowledge of nature, it is clear that the Indo-European must have lived somewhere in northern or central Europe. Two innovations contributed to the breakup of this Central European society: the horse and the wheel. Some of the Indo-Europeans began to travel east and in the course of time established the Indo-Iranian languages of the Caucasus, India, Pakistan, and Assam. Others began to drift westward to gentler climates of Europe. Their descendants are found in Greece, Italy, Germany, and the Baltic. Both the Rhine and the Rhone are thought to take their names from the Indo-European word meaning flow. English has much in common with all these languages. A word like brother has an obvious family resemblance to the Indo-European cousins: broder, bruder, pater, brat, brahir, and bratar. The Celts. One of the earliest westward migrations was made by a people whose descendants now live in Cornwall, the Highlands of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Brittany, the Celts. These Gaelic-speaking tribes were native to the British Isles long before the English. Today, the peoples of Wales prefer to call themselves Cymry, or fellow countrymen, a reminder that they, together with the Irish, Scots, and Cornish, are the true Britons. The language of Wales, Cymraeg, is part of the Celtic family stretching north to the islands of the Hebrides and south to the remote parts of Brittany. Welsh and Breton, in fact, are very closely related, and traditional Breton-French onion sellers who used to bicycle through the valleys of Wales every summer were able to communicate with their Welsh-speaking customers. The Welsh have remained fiercely independent in words as in deeds. The Cambrian Mountains, the mountain range that gave the fleeing Britons a refuge from the conquering Anglo-Saxons, isolated the Welsh language from outside influence for centuries. Even at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, in which the coal mines of Wales were to play such a vital part, the vast majority of people still spoke Welsh. In the great social and economic upheavals of Victorian Britain, there were some who believed that Welsh culture was being irreparably threatened, and they fled to Patagonia. In retrospect, they were unduly alarmist. Despite the Anglicanizing inroads of intermarriage, education, and industrialization, the persistence of the Welsh language and culture is remarkable. At the turn of the century, 2/3 of the Welsh were bilingual, according to recent census. Some 527,000, or some 20%, still claim to be Welsh speakers. Today, Welsh language and culture flourish. It is used in education and has theoretical equality with English in law and administration. Welsh nationalists have successfully campaigned, like the Quebec separatists, for bilingual road signs. The Welsh language television station S4C is popular and successful. The annual Eisteddfod keeps alive an idea of Welsh culture that goes back to the days when their ancestors enjoyed the sovereignty of the island called Britannia. The strength of this Welsh culture has permeated the English spoken in Wales. Elon Phillips, winner of the Eisteddfod Crown, believes the Welsh English speakers can always be identified by the lit of their speech. She remarks that even with Richard Burton, who spoke almost perfect standard English, his Welsh roots were recognizable in the melodious tilt of his voice and the sing-song way he used to talk English, the resonance, the rounded vowels in the music of the language. The Welshness of the English spoken in Wales also appears in sentence construction, according to Lon Phillips. In Welsh, we tend to invert our sentences, perhaps putting the adjective after the noun. I was talking to a neighbor the other day. She is from the valleys, and we were talking about a young Welshman who had died. What she said to me was, "Pity. It was that he died so early," which is really a literal translation of the Welsh. We also have a habit of using throwaway words, like, indeed, look, you. I think this originally started because we couldn't finish the translation from Welsh in time, so a word like indeed became an important stopgap. The Welsh contribution to English literature is also distinctive, and Alon Phillips believes that this too has deep Celtic roots. So you can always tell when a Welshman is writing in English because the flamboyance of their description. I think that comes down from the old Celtic warrior who used to go into battle against the Anglo-Saxons, not only with terror in their veins, but with red-hot waves of ecstasy. The Celtic Britons had the misfortune to inhabit an island that was highly desirable both for its agricultural and for its minerals. The early history of Britain is a story of successive invasions. One of the most famous was the landing of Julius Caesar and his legions in 55 BC. After a difficult start, the Roman Empire kept the British tribes in check, or at any rate at bay, beyond Hadrian's Wall. The evidence of the splendid palace at Fishbourne, near Chichester, suggests that many Celtic Britons became quite Romanized. The poet Montreal claimed, with the boastfulness of poets, that his work was read even in the remote islands of Britannia. A few Roman words corrupted into British usage. Place names like Chester, Manchester, and Winchester are derived from the Roman word castra, meaning a camp. Once the legions withdrew, traditionally in AD 410, and the empire collapsed, this achievement was threatened. Along the shore of Europe, a new generation of raiders was turning its attention to the misty, fertile island across the water.